everybody, and welcome to today's lesson, CSS Gradients, more specifically color gradients. And this lets you define the transition between two or more colors uh, smoothly, right? So we're going to take a look at that. Uh, we're going to be talking about linear gradients and radial gradients. And with linear gradients, the transition is going to be from left to right, up or down, even diagonally. That is what linear gradients is. But for radial gradients, we are going to have the transition happening from the center, and then it's going to transition outwardly. Okay, so let's take a look at some sample code, and then we will see. So this is an example. I have my HTML, and in this HTML, we only have an H1, H2, just saying top to bottom, because that's what we are going to create today, right now. And I created a div that we are going to style and get our gradient. So I give it an ID of gradient. So that's all that we did. So now let's go and style it. So I'm going to have my ID gradient, and then I'm going to style this. So let's give it a height of 300 pixels and a background color of brown. Okay, so let me just refresh this for now. And let me make this smaller so we can, let's say 200 pixels. Or better still, I'm going to make it 150 pixels. Okay, so good. We have our height, and let's set a width to 150 pixels. Okay, and maybe this is too small, so I'm gonna go back, set this to 450 and maybe 250. Good, so this should do. Good. So now I have my background color, and I'm gonna use the background image property to set this. I'm gonna have my background image, and we are doing the linear gradient. So I'm gonna choose linear gradient, and here we are gonna define uh two stop colors or more, right? So you're gonna have two colors. I'm gonna set from red, and I want to transition to yellow, right? Because that is the two colors. So when I just refresh it, you see it starts at red and it transitions to yellow, as you can see. The reason why we set this background color here is just so that if your browser doesn't support the linear gradient, it's gonna fall back to this color, right? So it's always good to have a fallback mechanism. Again, you can see that I did not specify the direction, right? By default, it's top to bottom. So if you just give two colors without any direction, you are going to have a top to bottom direction, which is by default. And we are going to be taking a look at some other directions. So the first direction we're going to be look at, aside from the default, is from left to right. So you have to add to right. So it's the direction and then the colors, right? So if I refresh this now, you're going to have left to right. It's going from red to yellow transition. So that's the to right, right? You can also have it's kind of like a diagonal, right? So if you wanted a diagonal, what you're gonna do is, and a diagonal always goes from bottom left to top right or something like that. So we're gonna use two, and I'm gonna say bottom right. So it's gonna go to bottom right, right here, right? So just so refresh it, you can see it starts from the red at 0.00 and it's trying to go all the way to the bottom right. Good. So that is another direction that you can have. You can also use angles, right? And so you can just specify the angle that you want to do, and I'm just going to copy this so I don't overwrite this. And instead of saying to bottom right, I'm going to give an angle, and I'm going to say 180 degrees. Good. And if I just refresh this is 180 degrees. And if I go 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees. So you can use degrees, you can use top to right, the default, and all that, right? So that's how we specify. So this actually gives you more flexibility. So as you can see from the examples I just gave, a value of 0 degrees uh, would give you to top, right? Bottom to top. And a value of 90 degrees, which we just did, is to the right, right? And a value of 180 degrees is to the bottom. So you can play around with the degrees to just whatever type you want to use. Good. And you can also use multiple stop colors. Right now we are only doing two stop colors, uh, red and yellow, right? So if you wanted, you can use multiple stop colors. So I can add another color here, maybe red, yellow, and green, which is the color of the Ghana national flag. Okay, so now when I refresh this, you can see red, yellow, and green. And then if you wanted, as with everything else, you can also add some transparency, right? If you wanted. So you can also use transparency and then that should work. So let's do a transparent one. And to use the transparency, you're going to use the RGB A, right? Which the A in that color format stands for your transparency, right? So I'm going to do RGB A, and I'm going to pass in the 2550. That's 0. And then I can add my transparency now, and I'm going to set it to 0. Right. And then I'm going to add my second color. I'm going to say still RGBA and pass in my function. I'm going to have 2550 dash 100. I'm passing in my transparency, which is going to be 0.5. And then my third color, so it's going to be black somewhat. Maybe some of these colors, I'm just arbitrarily choosing them, but you can always look that up. So RGBA, and then my third color, I'm going to have 100 to 55 and 950. And then I'm going to choose 1, meaning no transparency. So I'm going to go refresh this, and you can see the, wow, this looks beautiful, right? So you can specify transparency, and it's still going to give it to you. Remember that you see a brown here and not a black because I'm saying no transparency. So let me just give it so we can see 0.5. And then when I refresh this, and that is what it is. So just so we can see it properly, I just commented out the rest of the background colors, right, images and everything, so that we can actually see what is happening here. So with the black, I just give a transparency of 0.5, right? And then with this one, same 0.5. The green, or this one doesn't have any transparency, so the color is full color, and then you see the transition, right? So you can add transparency, and if I wanted this, I could also set this to black, no transparency, right? So now you can see the black fully. It's not black, but the color fully, right? Good. So this is the way we can add transparency to our gradient. So now let's take a look at the second type, which is the radial gradient. And for that, I'm going to create a different div, and I'm going to call this radial. Okay, and so it's going to be, I'm going to, what I'm going to do, so I'm going to have my radial, and then we're going to style it, right? So same thing, we're going to set our width and height, our height to 50 pixels, and our width, I'm going to set that to 450, and then we're going to have our background, and normally you would put a background color here as a fallback, but I'm just going to go ahead and do the background image, right? So we're going to use the radial gradient, and I'm going to pass in red, yellow, same, and green, right? And so when I refresh this, you can see it radiates radially from the center, yellow and then green, and it gives that transition. So the syntax is actually you to define the shape, right, the size, and then that's at the start position, and then you have your start color, and then your last color. So you can still have your multiple colors if it's one, two, if it's two, three, four, five, how many number of colors you want. But by default, because I did not specify the shape and the size, it's gonna take the default to be ellipse, right? And then the size is the farthest corner, right? And then the position will be the center. So that is the default. Good. So let's look at the non-defaults. So this, as you can see that the red, yellow, and green are all like evenly spaced. So this is evenly spaced by default. It tries to space the colors evenly, but you can have an unevenly spaced transition. For example, if I wanted the red to just be 5%, let's say 5%, and the yellow, I wanted it to have about 20%, right? And the green, about 60%. You could do that, right? And that will create an uneven distribution. So you can see how we can transition it unevenly, right? So the red is taking about 5%, the yellow about 20%, and the green will take about 60%, which is an uneven type. And now we can now start to set our shape, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this so I don't, right? And maybe I can just comment this out, and I'm going to have an evenly shaped transition. So I'm going to take out these percentages so that it becomes even. Good. So when I refresh this, I still have my even shape, right? So now I can specify the shape, right? This is an ellipse, but I could make it, uh, say, a circle, right? So let's say I put a circle right here, and then I refresh this. You can see that it's a circle instead of an ellipse, right? It's going out radially in a circle form. So you can change the shape. By default, it's an ellipse, but you can change it to whatever you want. And the next thing I want to do is the size, right? We don't want the default anymore. So I'm going to first do this. Okay. And then now I'm going to use the size. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to closest side. Sorry, closest side. Good. At 60%, not 55%. Okay. So now when I refresh this, sorry, when I refresh this and I had an error here, I just took it off. You can see that the closest side, 60%, 55%. You can also use the farther side, the closest corner, or the farthest corner, right? So this is the closest side, and this is at the 60%, 55%. So the way to read this values is if I make it 50-50, it means that I take 50% of the width, 50% of the height, and the position is the closest side, right? So it starts in the middle. If I shift this to say 80%, you can see that it goes 80%. It tries to give the 80% mark, but it's still the height is still the 50% mark. So it's down here somewhere. So it's the XY position, right? So the width height position. So for example, if I wanted to come down here, somewhere here, I need to drop this down to about 80%, right? So that it shifts 80% here and then 80% down. So it's gonna be somewhere here. So when I refresh it, you can see it down here somewhere. So that's how to do it. You can play around with it just so you get comfortable, but that is how I do it, right? Finally, you can also use the repeating uh, radial gradients, which is background image, and I just do one. You can do it for the linear type also, repeating linear gradient. You still pass in the red, your yellow, and your green. Right, so let me just refresh this. And then I'm gonna pass in here 10%, and I wanna pass in here, say 20%. Okay, so if I just refresh this, you can see the repeating 10, 20%. Okay, so that is all. You can do the same. You can do the same with linear or repeating linear. Sorry, maybe this is wrong. I did the linear one. Should have done the radial. Sorry. Good. So now, not radiant, but radial. Okay. So refresh this and you have it radial. So you can still play around with a linear gradient, repeating linear gradient and repeating radial gradient. So thank you guys for watching. I was trying to not cross the 15-minute mark, but I did by 3 minutes, but it's okay. So see you in the next lesson. Bye bye.